Out of all of the lists I've made on this channel, today I'm going to attempt to try and tackle the most difficult one yet, the top 25 best games of the decade. And while trying to make this list, I had to accept something. There has been a lot of great games over the last 10 years, and no matter what, I was going to have to cut a few games that I think deserves to be here. With that said, it is inevitable that some of your favorite games will not make my top 25, and if it doesn't, that doesn't mean that I didn't like it. It just means that I may have had to make an unfortunate cut, but please let me know what your favorite games is as well. A part of my channel is helping others discover great games, and I'm more than happy to hear differing opinions in the comments below. Regardless though, let's get right into the list. At number 25, I have Rocket League, and this really is one of the biggest surprise hits of the entire decade. I mean, when you look at this game, it doesn't really look like that much. It's just a bunch of toy-like cars running into a giant ball, trying to push it into a goal. It's something like soccer or football if you're not in America, but then you play this brilliant game and you realize just how good it actually is. And here's the thing about Rocket League. It may have a low bar for entry, but it has an incredibly high ceiling for highly skilled players who knows how to glide through the air. This is such a good game, and it will last for years to come. Gears of War was one of the most influential games for the Xbox 360 and PlayStation 3, but even to this day there is a very large part of the community that feels that Gears of War has the best shooting mechanics out of all third-person shooters, and I'm inclined to agree. On the surface, Gears' cover mechanics seems fairly straightforward. Jump into cover, aim, and shoot. But once you actually play the multiplayer, you realize how in-depth the mechanics truly is, as you glide cover to cover, use power weapons, and control the map. While I think the story for Gears is fairly solid, I think it's the multiplayer that truly shines. And if you're willing to put it into practice, it's one of the highest skill ceiling games on the entire market. And really, you can just swap Gears of War 3 with Gears 5 if you want, as Gears 5 is just as good, if not better. Resident Evil as a franchise has always been a legendary horror thriller, but over the last decade, or more specifically in just the last 5 years, you could arguably say Resident Evil is at its very best. Not only did we get Resident Evil 7, which is one of the best horror games in years, but we also got Resident Evil 2 Remake, which is even better than the 1998 classic. If I were to choose just one of the two though, I would go with Resident Evil 2, but I will also say that Resident Evil 7 is right up there with the same quality. When Rainbow Six Siege first came out, it was kind of dismissed by much of the gaming community and critics alike, but I was adamant on just how good this game was. And as Ubisoft continued to support it, the rest of the world started to notice this as well. It has gotten more and more characters with different playstyles, and it has a very unique playstyle to the game, which asks you to play very tactical and work with your team rather than just going out guns blazing. Granted, you can do that and still succeed, but the destructible environment really plays a large role in this game as you shoot victims from unexpected destinations. Not only do I think Rainbow Six Siege is a great game, but I think it's one of this decade's best multiplayer games. It goes to show you why you shouldn't write a game off just because it has a shaky launch. This may be one of the first surprises on this list, but I've said this for years and I truly believe it. Killer Instinct is the best 2D fighting game that I have ever played, and it has been so underappreciated. When Killer Instinct first released, it was already a great game, with possibly the best netcode I've seen in a fighting game. But it had one big flaw, and that was a small cast of characters. Season 1 released with just 6 characters and added 2 more as time went on, but the fans knew this was a special game, and thankfully Xbox continued to support it until it grew to 29 total characters. And the thing is, it's a highly diverse cast, with each character having a very unique playstyle. You can play as a killer robot, a toad, an ice alien, a boxer, a vampire, and the list goes on and on. This is such an amazing fighting game, and a franchise that is more than deserving of continued support. Okay, so I cheated here and chose 2 different games. Hollow Knight and Ori and the Blind Forest, which are both similar, but wildly different at the same time. Hollow Knight is probably the best Metroidvania game in terms of its combat, while Ori and the Blind Forest takes the opposite side of the spectrum and really excels with its platforming. Hollow Knight is the Dark Souls of Metroidvania games, while Ori is the Mario. One is dark and gloomy, while the other is vibrant and beautiful. With that said, I think there is a real case for both of these games to be at the top of the list for best Metroidvania games ever made, and because of that, I just couldn't not include one or the other from this list. Depending on what your favorite playstyle is, you can really go with either game, and it would still be a great decision. I've said this several times in the past, but Hellblade is one of the best story-driven games I've ever played. It's a deep and powerful story that can greatly have an impact on your life, as I've seen this happen with several different people. It also has a very cinematic flair with its combat and approach, but one of its most impressive features is the facial animations. The actress Melina Jorgens, which I'm hoping I'm pronouncing that right, did an incredible job, and the technology Ninja Theory used put all of her emotions on full display. To top it off, I think the sound design in Hellblade is one of the best you'll ever hear, which is why I do encourage those who do play this game to try it with a good pair of headphones if they have some. Skyrim is one of the most influential games of this decade for its brilliance in terms of open world games. In fact, I have talked to person after person who has played Skyrim for 50 plus hours and yet has barely even played the main story, and that's because everything feels meaningful in Skyrim's rich open world. The character building is really good with the plethora of choices you make, but it's the world around you that I find so alluring. That isn't to say that the main story is bad, because that's not true. But it is easy to get distracted, which is a testament on how good this game is as a whole package. I mean, how many times this generation have we heard about a game being influenced than none other than Skyrim? Many people tend to ignore racing games when it comes to lists like this, but I don't think that it's necessarily fair, and if I were to say that there is one racing game that really stood out this decade, it's Forza Horizon 4. In fact, I would say that Forza Horizon 4 is the best racing game ever made, not including kart racing games. Forza Horizon puts you into an open, semi-online world as you see other real-life drivers roaming around, but it's the cars that feel so good. I mean, yes, the world around you is absolutely gorgeous, but there is something about Forza Horizon that just feels amazing as you race on both the road and off-road. And then on top of that, they added seasons to Horizon 4, which I know that may sound like a simple thing, but it was absolutely brilliant, as it not only changes how you interact with the world, but also how you race in it. As an example, during the summer, rivers may flow beautifully and gracefully, but during a harsh winter, you can then race on frozen ice. If you like racing games, Forza Horizon is a masterpiece. I have continuously said on this channel that I think that Celeste may possibly be the best 2D platforming game of all time, and I absolutely mean that. It's one of those games that really takes you by surprise because, yes, the game mechanics are near perfect, but unlike other 2D platformers, it actually has an incredibly good, heartwarming story. Celeste may not be as well known as some of the other games on this list, but it does stand toe-to-toe with them. And speaking of games that was influenced by Skyrim from earlier, we have Zelda Breath of the Wild, which many may even consider this to be the very best game of the decade. Breath of the Wild, though, is an interesting game as it takes the beloved Zelda franchise and returns it to its roots by making it a completely open-ended world. It does lack in puzzles compared to other Zelda games, but there isn't a game on the market that gives you the sense of freedom that Breath of the Wild does. It also adds the climbing mechanic, which I do think will play a role in other games moving forward, and has a similar combat system to the ever-popular Dark Souls. Then it gives you that freedom that Skyrim does, and you have an overall excellent game. I'm not sure if another franchise in games has done as good of a job as Mass Effect when it comes to telling a story where the players makes the decisions. And even though the ending of the franchise does falter, it doesn't take away on how good these games actually are, and in specific Mass Effect 2. Though I will say this, Mass Effect 2 doesn't just have a good story with characters you really care about, but it also has fantastic gameplay that somewhat resembles Gears of War. Throw in some RPG mechanics with it, and I think you really have an instant classic. In all honesty, I even consider it to be one of the best sci-fi worlds in all mediums, including books and cinema. It is that good. I've always enjoyed 3D collectathon platformers, but the thing is, it seems like it's such a rare thing to actually get a great one. But with Super Mario Odyssey, not only did we get a good 3D collectathon platformer, but possibly the best one to ever be created. It's actually brilliant, and that's because of its new mechanic that allows Mario to throw his newfound hat friend, Cappy, at several different creatures or objects and then transfer his body into whatever his hat lands on. This is an original, creative idea that constantly changes how the game can be played as you turn into a frog, dinosaur, or even a tank, to name a few. To add to that, there is 999 hidden moons to find, so you're constantly discovering new and hidden secrets throughout the world. NIER Automata was one of the surprise hits for me over the decade. Platinum Games has always made really fun games, but I think NIER Automata goes a step beyond that by making a mesmerizing world. There is almost something odd about it and its characters, but as you dig deeper and deeper, you start to realize there is so much more to this game than just the amazing combat. It's a story that is among the very best as you stick with it. It is, however, necessary to play through the game multiple times, but it's more like chapters than playthroughs, as each playthrough is drastically different. Uncharted in many ways really kicked off the third-person cinematic games that almost feels like an action movie, but to this day I don't know if there is a franchise that has done it better than Uncharted. It has very relatable and likable characters that you really grow to feel attached to. I actually think it may be one of my favorite cast of characters of all time, and the way Naughty Dog tells the story is so well done. And with each game, it just seems their storytelling gets better and better, but then it's the way the game plays as well, as it mixes shooting with platforming and even puzzles. Throw in some cinematic set pieces and it's really become a staple for games like it. Uncharted 4 may have been the end of Nathan Drake's story, but I think it's a franchise that will be remembered by this generation's gamers for decades to come. That's right, a PlayStation Vita game made this list, as I would consider Persona 4 Golden to possibly be the best JRPG game to ever exist. And I know it has tough competition in that genre, but there is a real debate for it. Persona has continuously had great games in the franchise, but I think Persona 4 Golden is the one that stands out the most to me, thanks to its well-made story and cast of characters that all have great chemistry with one another. It also helped popularize the social aspect that seems to be so common within the genre today, and even the turn-based combat is among the very best in the genre as you unlock new personas. If anything, this is one of the most memorable games I've played in the last 10 years. We may be celebrating the last decade of games, but Super Smash Bros. Ultimate is celebrating the entire history of games with more than 70 characters and still growing. I mean, honestly, what Sakurai has achieved with Super Smash Bros. Ultimate is unbelievable. This is a game where you can play as Mario, Ryu from Street Fighter, Cloud from Final Fantasy, and even Banjo-Kazooie. But not only is it a great cast of characters and probably the largest we've ever seen in a fighting game, but it's also a very unique fighting game. In many ways, Super Smash Bros. Is a genre of its own, as your goal is to knock your opponent off the level. This creates an entirely different dynamic than other fighting games, but it just works. It's one of those games that may have a low bar for entry, but an incredibly high ceiling for players who really want to put in the work. Nothing on the market is quite like Smash Bros., and it's one of the best games ever created. Naughty Dog has made a lot of really good games, but The Last of Us went one step further with its storytelling than I was even expecting. I think while I actually like Uncharted a little bit more than I do The Last of Us, I still consider The Last of Us a masterpiece because of its story completely consumes you. You can feel the heartache and the struggle among the characters and the hard choices that they have to make. The shooting mechanics is also much improved over the Uncharted franchise, which is why I think its multiplayer game mode was a hit with fans who enjoyed it. And just in terms of stories though, I think The Last of Us is among the best to ever be made. Red Dead Redemption 2's biggest strength is also its biggest flaw, and that is how meticulous Rockstar was. There just seems to be no shortcuts taken in Red Dead Redemption 2 while it fully animates almost everything you do. If you look in a shelf, Arthur Morgan will slowly open the shelf to find items. And speaking of Arthur Morgan, this is why I fell in love with this game. I think Rockstar has always done a good job with their stories, but Red Dead Redemption 2 has claimed that #1 spot for me. The acting is actually, I think, the best I've ever seen in video games, and this is a lengthy game as well, with a lot of things to do in a big open world. Whether that be fishing, hunting, or just simply playing through the story, it's most certainly one of the most impressive games that I've ever played. The one issue I do have with it though is its shooting mechanics, which I'm not a huge fan of, but the world, characters, and every other aspect of the game is just too good to ignore. Without a doubt, Minecraft has had a major impact on games over the last 10 years. I mean, when I was growing up, Legos was popular, but now kids are growing up with Minecraft to express their creativity, which is why this goes beyond just gaming. We're seeing Minecraft in schools now helping children. But the truth is, Minecraft goes beyond just that, as even adults can enjoy this game. There is a reason Minecraft has sold well over 100 million copies, and that is no easy thing to do for a game that isn't free to play. It's well deserved, and if you're a gamer, then you have more than likely played Minecraft at least once. I've said this a few times on this channel, but I think God of War is the best single player game that I've ever played. I wasn't really a fan of the original God of War trilogy, but the new God of War is among my favorite games to ever be made. The thing is, a lot of the time a game will have a good story, but fail in comparison in terms of gameplay or vice versa. It's a rare thing to get both down so perfectly, which is exactly why I consider God of War the best single player experience, because there is no sacrifice to either the gameplay or story. In fact, I would say that God of War sets the bar in these categories. The characters are phenomenal, and after disliking Kratos for so many years, I suddenly care about him. But the gameplay with its hack and slash combat is just as sublime. This is a must-have title. For a time, Valve was considered among the best developers in the entire industry, and for good reason. But Portal 2 is the one that stands out most to me. It's a very humorous game, but it's also the best puzzle game ever created. I love this story, but it's special. I mean, there is nothing quite like Portal 2, and I think it will stand the test of time for decades to come for its original and unique gameplay. The Witcher 3 has went down as an instant classic, and it's not just a great RPG, but many consider it to be the best RPG ever made. And it's hard to debate that with its fantastic story and world. And one of the more impressive things in The Witcher 3 is how they conduct side quests, and even those feel very gratifying. It's a very rare thing to make both the side quests interesting and the story, but that is exactly what CD Projekt Red did. The combat as well is unique, though I do know some people aren't in love with it, but I do believe The Witcher 3 stands out from this decade. I think a lot of people were kind of sold on Overwatch the minute that they saw the first cinematic trailer with this crazy fast British woman by the name of Tracer zipping across the room. But then when you actually played the game, you realized just how in-depth it was. It wasn't just a very charming game with some of the decade's best designed characters, but because each character had their own unique abilities, similar to something like a MOBA, but in a first-person shooter, it almost changed the way you viewed shooting games. It made the game into a much more team-oriented game, where your character's unique abilities were vital for victory. Sure, this type of thing may start an argument or two in the chat room, but I think Overwatch goes down as the best competitive multiplayer game of the entire decade. We've talked about some influential games on this list so far, but I don't think that there is a game that has been more influential than Dark Souls. And you can include Bloodborne here as well, but yes, Dark Souls has basically created a new genre with its unique and weighty combat system. I mean, sure, it's an RPG, but it's the way Dark Souls feels that makes it so good. That risk-reward with the brutal difficulty, and losing everything you gained if you die. And then there's that triumph when you beat some of the best bosses in any video game ever made. A lot of games have issues with aging, but I think that Dark Souls will still be among the best even a decade from now. That is just how good the combat actually is. What From Software has done is truly a huge achievement, and for that matter, their most recent game, Sekiro, is yet another great game. So with that said, Dark Souls is the best game of the decade on my list. Anyways though, that's it for this video, but if I missed any of your favorites, which I'm pretty sure I did, as I mentioned before, this was by far the most difficult top 25 I've ever done. There was just so many games that I wanted to include, but I had to make several cuts. But let me know what your favorites are in the comments below. And if you liked the video, don't forget to hit that bell notification and subscribe button. Peace out.